Hi everyone, and welcome to the first lesson of the project examples. In this lesson we're going to be looking at the process structures. Now these are the structures that are used to house the day-to-day information for things like pumps, valves, levels, analog signals, and some of the things that we've seen in our lessons previously will be more apparent and will feature in this lesson. So the first thing is this is the first time we've seen this project, so we may not know where everything is. So let's have a look at where I'm declaring my DUTs. So I've structured it a little bit different in this project. So my DUTs are in with my, they're grouped by categories basically. So if I look at my structured objects, so instruments and devices, analog devices, in here I have a generic analog device and my DUTs are in a subfolder. Everything to do with this generic analog device is in this folder here. Let's just make this a little bit bigger. And the same for here, I have a dedicated instrument type called a hack, and here my DUT for this particular type of equipment. No different in the fixed speed pumps, DUTs and my functions. Quarter turn valve, DUTs, so my structures are always in a folder called DUTs in the asset type that the structure belongs to. So there's quite a lot going on here, but if I was to open one, it's a very similar thing to what we've seen in previous lessons, that I have my I/O for my mapping, and then I have my actual data that interacts with my my assets. So for scale min, scale max for the scaling, and then the alarm values for high release, high alarm, and that sort of stuff, and then a status structure. If we go and have a look at a quarter turn valve, very similar thing. I have my handoff auto structure, my I/O for the physical feedback for the valve, buttons for SCADA to interact with or HMI to interact with, and then indicators, my control outputs which will be passed to my output mapping layer, and then a parameter for SCADA to update for travel time, and then two additional structures which house some additional information around alarm statuses and control statuses. So if we have a look at where these sit, or where these structures are instantiated in global variables, I have a typed variable list folder, and these house, grouped again by categories, dedicated variable lists, as we saw in a previous lesson, that are used to call structures dedicated to a particular asset. So in this example, we have a fixed speed pump, FSP001, and in here I have data and then DUT FSP, which is the fixed speed pump structure name. And then again, generic analog instruments, LT001. In here I have my data again, which is my generic analog, but I also have some additional parameters that SCADA can interact with to set the enable level for this particular control and the disable level for this particular control. So this would be controlling a valve, so the level at which a valve is allowed to open and the level at which a valve must close. And again, very similar story for this QM001, which is another analog instrument. So data, DUT generic analog, and it also this particular instrument also accepts another data structure and has two additional parameters. And this sort of continues on, that every single asset has its own global structure, which means they're segregated. If I need to add to that structure, I'm not going to affect anything else. Nothing else has to be reshuffled or moved around. This is, we've been through this in the previous lesson, and I've stressed the importance of trying to reduce having to shuffle code around or shuffle variables around, especially in PLCs that may be linked to physical memory addresses. And then we've got our sim data, the simulation, which will have a look at in more detail in the input mapping lesson, and then switches for our switches, which don't have any additional parameters in. And this is just an overview of how it's instantiating our process structures. So these would be accessed by all areas of the code in terms of control and in terms of interfacing from SCADA. And that really plays the first part of building the project. So once we're at this point here where we have our structures declared and the structures are actually being used and tied against a variable, we're now ready to have a place where inputs can be mapped to, SCADA interactions can be mapped to, and then control statuses and elements required around the general control of the PLC program have a place in which they are going to be stored.